The Vampire King's boots left no sound on the cobblestone street, but his shadow fell across the bakery window like a blade just as the woman inside dropped a full bag of flour. Yevgeny Emberlain watched through the glass as the plump baker laughed at herself, white powder billowing around her curves like winter fog. She wore an apron stretched tight across generous hips, her dark hair escaping its bun in sweaty tendrils. It was 4 a.m. Every other shop on the street lay dark and shuttered, but golden light spilled from her windows and the scent of rising dough drifted through the crack beneath her door. He should have kept walking. His patrol route covered 12 city blocks, and he'd already dealt with 2 fledgling vampires who hadn't learned to hunt cleanly. His territory demanded constant vigilance, especially now, with whispers of challenge circling like carrion birds. But something about the woman's laughter, full-throated and genuine despite being alone, made him pause. The door chimed when he pushed it open. She looked up from where she knelt, scooping flour back into the bag with her bare hands, and her smile didn't falter at the sight of him. Most humans flinched when they saw him properly. Bone-white skin, hair like fresh snow falling past his shoulders, eyes the color of winter ice. He stood 6.5 feet tall in his long black coat, and he knew exactly how much death clung to him, despite the expensive cut of his clothes. "Oh, hello, you're out early," she said, as if a creature like him walked into her bakery every morning. "Or late, I suppose. Give me just a second to— oh, damn it." More flour puffed up as she tried to stand, and she laughed again, that same warm sound. "I'm making a mess of everything tonight, morning, whatever this counts as." "You should be closed," Yevgeny said. His voice came out harder than he'd intended, centuries of command roughening the words. "I am closed." She gestured at the dark, closed sign hanging in the window. "I'm just baking for the morning rush. And for Mrs. Patterson across the street, she's elderly. Can't get around so well, I bring her fresh rolls every day. Plus, the homeless shelter takes whatever I have left from yesterday, and I like to add a few extra loaves if I can." She finally managed to stand, dusting her hands on her apron and leaving white handprints across the fabric. Up close, he could see the flush in her round cheeks from the oven heat, the kindness in her brown eyes, the flour streak across her nose that she hadn't noticed. She was perhaps 30, soft in all the ways humans were soft, alive in ways he'd almost forgotten existed. "Would you like something? I've got coffee on and the cinnamon rolls are almost done." She moved behind the counter, already reaching for a cup. "I don't eat," he said flatly. "Oh." She paused, then smiled again, undeterred. "Well, you can sit anyway if you'd like. It's nice to have company. I'm Zinnia, by the way, Zinnia Lightwell. This is my place." He should have left. Instead, he found himself sliding onto one of the stools at her counter, his coat pooling around him like liquid shadow. "Yevgeny. That's a beautiful name. Russian." She poured herself coffee, the domestic gesture so normal it made something in his chest ache with an emotion he couldn't name. "Romanian. Very old. You look young, though." She sipped her coffee, studying him with open curiosity rather than fear. "Are you new to the neighborhood? I know most of the night workers around here. The hospital's just 2 blocks down, and we get a lot of nurses and orderlies coming through." "I'm not new. I've been here longer than you've been alive." She laughed, thinking it was a joke. "Right. Okay, mysterious stranger. Keep your secrets." The oven timer chimed, and she bustled away to pull out trays of cinnamon rolls, the smell rolling through the small bakery like sweetness made manifest. Yevgeny watched her work, fascinated despite himself by the efficiency of her movements, the way she hummed under her breath, the care she took arranging each roll on cooling racks. "Are you sure you don't want one?" She held up a roll, steam still rising from the golden curves. "I won't be offended if you're not hungry, but they're really good. That's not arrogance, I'm just stating facts. I told you, I don't eat. Medical thing? Something like that." She set the roll down and came back to the counter, leaning her elbows on the worn surface. "But you came in anyway. Why?" It was a fair question. Yevgeny looked at her, this human woman with flour in her hair and kindness bleeding from every pore, and couldn't find an answer that made sense. "Because you were laughing? Because your light drew me like a moth? Because in 300 years of existence, I've forgotten what warmth feels like? I was curious," he said finally. "About the bakery? About you." Her cheeks flushed darker, and she straightened, busying herself with arranging tools that didn't need arranging. "Well, not much to be curious about. I bake bread, I feed people, pretty simple life." "Why? Why what? Why feed the elderly woman? Why give to the shelter? You could simply sell your goods and keep the profit. Zinnia looked at him like he'd asked why the sky was blue. Because people are hungry. Because Mrs. Patterson's husband died last year and she's lonely. And a warm roll reminds her someone cares. Because the folks at the shelter are going through hell and a piece of fresh bread might be the only good thing in their day. She shrugged. Why wouldn't I? Something twisted in Yevgeny's chest, sharp and unexpected. When had the world become so full of people who needed reasons to be kind? When had he become someone who expected cruelty as the default? You're unusual, he said quietly. You're pretty unusual yourself, Mr. Yevgeny. No last name, who doesn't eat but sits in bakeries at 4 a.m. Emberlain. Yevgeny Emberlain. There, was that so hard? She grinned at him, and he felt the corners of his mouth twitch in an expression he hadn't made in decades. The sky outside was lightening from black to charcoal gray. Dawn would come soon, and with it the fire that would burn him to ash if he didn't retreat to shelter. He stood, and Zinnia's face fell slightly. Have to go already. The sun will rise soon. I have a medical sensitivity to daylight. Oh, you're one of those people I read about that. The skin condition, right? She started wrapping up a cinnamon roll in wax paper before he could protest. Well, even if you don't eat now, maybe you know someone who does. On the house, for keeping me company. He took the wrapped roll because refusing seemed cruel, this small kindness from a woman who gave kindness like breathing. Their fingers brushed, and her warmth shot through his cold skin like electricity. Thank you, he said, the words rusty from disuse. Come back anytime. I'm here every night from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. Well, 6:30 on weekends. I do the farmer's market on Saturdays. He should have said no, should have nodded politely and disappeared from her life like the shadow he was. Instead, he found himself saying, tomorrow night then. Her smile could have powered the whole city. I'll save you a seat. He left before she could see the dawn's first light touch the windows, before he had to explain why smoke began to rise from the hand that held her gift. 2 blocks away, in the underground chambers beneath an abandoned church that served as his court, he passed the cinnamon roll to one of his human servants and tried not to think about how the scent of it reminded him of everything he'd lost when he'd chosen immortality over warmth. The next night, Yevgeny told himself he was simply maintaining his patrol route. The bakery fell within his territory, and it was his responsibility to ensure every business under his protection remained safe. That he arrived at 3 a.m. instead of 4, that he changed into fresh clothes and tied back his hair with a silk ribbon, these were merely coincidences. Zinnia's face lit up when he walked through the door. You came back. I was hoping you would, but wasn't sure. Here, sit. I'm experimenting with a new bread recipe, and I need someone to tell me if it smells good. I told you I don't eat. I know, but you can smell, right? The nose knows. She pulled a loaf from the oven, golden brown and studded with what looked like olives and herbs. Well, he inhaled carefully. Rosemary, Kalamata olives, a touch of honey in the dough. Yes, see, you're helpful even without eating. She set the loaf to cool and grabbed her coffee mug, settling across the counter from him like they were old friends. So, Yevgeny Emberlain, what do you do when you're not mysteriously appearing in bakeries? I manage territory, keep the peace, ensure certain laws are followed. Like a cop? Something like that. You don't seem like a cop. She tilted her head, studying him. Too fancy. That coat probably cost more than my monthly rent. I've had time to accumulate resources. There you go again with the cryptic old man energy. You're what, 25, 30? You can't be that much older than me. 347, he thought. Out loud, he said, I'm older than I look. Aren't we all? She yawned, covering her mouth with a flour-dusted hand. Sorry, not bored, just been up since yesterday morning. One of my suppliers delivered late and I had to completely redo my schedule. You should rest. Can't. Bread waits for no woman. But even as she said it, she swayed slightly, exhaustion bleeding through her smile. Yevgeny stood and moved around the counter before he could stop himself. Show me. Show you what? What you're doing. I can't eat the bread, but I can help you make it. Zinnia blinked at him, surprise clear on her round face. You want to bake? I want you to not collapse from exhaustion in your own oven. Well, when you put it that way. She laughed and grabbed a spare apron from a hook, holding it out to him. Fair warning, you're about to get very messy. The apron was ridiculously small on him, barely tying around his waist, and Zinnia dissolved into giggles at the sight. You look like a vampire who wandered into a bakery. He froze. What? You know, with the whole pale dramatic thing you have going on. Very gothic romance novel. She was still laughing, no suspicion in her eyes, no fear. Just amusement at the absurdity of this tall, austere man in a tiny floral apron. I see, he said carefully and allowed himself to relax. She taught him to knead dough, her warm hands guiding his cold ones, showing him how to fold and press and turn. The rhythm of it was meditative, and the feel of the dough beneath his fingers alive, growing, transforming, struck him as almost magical. He'd forgotten that humans created things. In his world of politics and power plays and blood rights, creation had no place. Only consumption, only taking, only the endless maintenance of what already existed. You're good at this, Zinnia said, watching his hands work. Look at that perfect window pane, you're a natural. I'm following instructions. No, this is more than that. You've got the touch. She bumped her hip against his, casual and friendly, and the warmth of that brief contact sang through his body like a bell. Maybe you missed your calling. Could have been a baker instead of a mysterious territory manager. I don't think my current employers would appreciate the career change. Well, their loss is my gain. With you helping, I might actually get to sleep before dawn. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the scrape of dough on marble, the distant rumble of the city waking up, the soft music playing from a radio in the corner. Yevgeny found himself relaxing in ways he hadn't relaxed in years, the constant vigilance that kept him alive easing in the presence of this woman who saw him as nothing more than an odd man with a medical condition and too fancy clothes. Can I ask you something? Zinnia said eventually, shaping roles with practiced efficiency. Yes? Why don't you have friends? He looked up sharply. What makes you think I don't? You came into a bakery at 4 a.m. and sat with a stranger. You came back the next night, and you look... She paused, choosing words carefully. You look lonely. Really, really lonely. The kind of lonely that's been building for a long time. No one had seen through him so clearly in decades. In his world, showing vulnerability meant death. So he'd learned to wear power like armor, to let his reputation as the unyielding vampire king of the Eastern Territory precede him. Even his own court kept a careful distance, respect and fear blurring into one indistinguishable mass. My position makes friendship complicated, he said finally. What position is that? I'm responsible for many people, their safety, their lives. That responsibility doesn't leave room for much else. Zinnia set down the role she was shaping and looked at him directly. That sounds incredibly lonely. It's necessary. Maybe, but it still sounds lonely. She wiped her hands on her apron. Well, for what it's worth, I'm your friend now. That's decided. You can't undecide it by being all mysterious and distant. I'm aggressively friendly. It's my fatal flaw. Something warm and unfamiliar bloomed in Yevgeny's chest. You don't know me. I know you're kind enough to help a tired baker. I know you're careful with your hands and you follow instructions and you showed up when you said you would. That's more than I can say for a lot of people. She smiled at him, that same sunshine smile. Plus, you've got good taste in bakeries. There are no other bakeries open at this hour. Exactly. Impeccable taste. He laughed. He actually laughed, the sound startling him with its rusty unfamiliarity. Zinnia's smile widened, and she went back to shaping roles with the satisfied air of someone who just won a contest. They finished the baking as the sky lightened outside, gray dawn pressing against the windows. Yevgeny felt the pull of the sun like a hook in his chest, the instinct to retreat growing stronger with every passing minute. I have to go, he said, untying the ridiculous apron. Same time tomorrow? He should say no. Every night he spent here was a night away from his duties, from the growing tensions in his territory, from the whispers that Yevgeny Emberlain had grown soft in his old age. But Zinnia was looking at him with such open hopefulness, such uncomplicated warmth, that he found himself nodding. Tomorrow. Bring better jokes next time. Your material could use work. I didn't tell any jokes. Exactly. That's the problem. He left her laughing at her own wit, and despite the sun's burning proximity, despite the chaos waiting for him below ground, he felt lighter than he had in 100 years. The pattern continued for a week. Every night, Yevgeny would complete his patrol and arrive at Zinnia's bakery sometime between 3 and 4 a.m. Every night, she would greet him like a friend, set him to work helping with whatever needed doing, and talked to him about everything and nothing. He learned that she'd inherited the bakery from her grandmother, that her parents had wanted her to be a lawyer, that she'd never been in love but hoped to be someday. She learned that he lived alone, that he'd traveled extensively, that he had what she called fancy rich person taste in music and art. She never pushed when he deflected personal questions, never seemed bothered by the things he couldn't or wouldn't explain. And slowly, carefully, he began to soften in her presence, the centuries of cold calculation thawing like ice in spring. On the 8th night, he arrived to find her crying. She tried to hide it, turning away quickly and wiping at her face, but her shoulders shook with suppressed sobs. Yevgeny was across the bakery in an instant, his hand hovering near her shoulder, uncertain. What happened? Nothing. It's stupid. Tell me. The command in his voice made her look up, and the tears on her round cheeks made him want to tear apart whoever had put them there. The building's owner raised my rent. 40%, effective next month. She laughed bitterly. I can't afford that. Even if I cut back on all the free stuff, even if I raise prices, which would drive away half my customers, I can't make those numbers work. He can't do that. There are laws. He can, actually. Something about neighborhood improvement initiatives and market rate adjustments. It's all legal, just cruel. She wiped at her face again. I'll have to close. Find somewhere cheaper, maybe outside the city. Start over. The thought of this bakery dark and empty, of Zinnia gone from his night, struck Yevgeny with unexpected force. Who owns the building? Some property management company. Harker Holdings, I think. Why? Harker Holdings. One of the many human businesses owned and operated by younger vampires, the new generation who saw humans as resources to be exploited rather than protected. Yevgeny had been meaning to address their aggressive expansion tactics, but it had fallen lower on his priority list than the direct territorial challenges, no longer. I'll handle it, he said. Zinnia blinked at him. What? Your rent. I'll handle it. Yevgeny, you can't just... This isn't your problem. You're my friend. You said so yourself. That makes it my problem. I can't let you pay my rent. That's insane. I'm not paying it. I'm ensuring it returns to a reasonable rate. He pulled out his phone, already composing a message to his second in command. You won't close. You won't leave. Why do you care so much? The question came out soft, confused, her tear-stained face turned up to his. Because you laugh like sunlight, he thought. Because you taught me to need bread. Because you see me as a person instead of a king. Because in 300 years, you're the first thing I've wanted to protect that wasn't duty. Because the city needs your bakery, he said instead, and you need to sleep instead of crying over landlords. So I'm fixing it. Just like that? Just like that. She stared at him for a long moment, then launched herself at him in a hug that nearly knocked him backward. Her soft body pressed against his angular one, warm and alive and trusting, and his arms came up automatically to hold her. She smelled like vanilla and cinnamon and yeast, and he thought he could stay exactly like this for the rest of his immortal existence. Thank you, she whispered against his chest. You're welcome. She pulled back, wiping at her eyes again and laughing shakily. Okay. Crisis averted by mysterious rich friend. Now I need to bake about 1,000 cookies for a catering order, and you're going to help me. I don't know how to make cookies. You didn't know how to knead bread a week ago, and look at you now. Come on, Mr. Emberlain. Time to learn. By dawn, they'd produced a mountain of cookies, chocolate chip, oatmeal raisin, snickerdoodle, double chocolate. Zinnia packaged them with swift efficiency while Yevgeny watched, making careful note of every step so he could help more effectively next time. Next time. The phrase settled in his mind like a promise. When he left that morning, the sun already burning at the horizon, his phone buzzed with a message from his second in command. Harker Holdings has been encouraged to adjust their business practices. The baker's rent will return to previous rates with a formal apology. How encouraged? Yevgeny texted back. Very. They won't trouble anyone in your territory again. Good. Let it be known that he protected what was his, even if it was just a small bakery run by a plump woman with flour in her hair and kindness in her smile. The trouble came a week later, just as Yevgeny had begun to relax into the rhythm of his nights with Zinnia. He arrived at the bakery to find 3 vampires standing outside, young and arrogant in the way of newly turned immortals. They wore expensive clothes that screamed new money, all designer labels and flash, and they reeked of the kind of recklessness that started wars. Emberlain, the tallest one said, his fangs visible even though no humans were present. Bad form. We've been looking for you. Then you should have come to my court, not here. Yevgeny kept his voice level, but power rippled through the words, ancient and absolute. We're not interested in your court, we're interested in your territory. My territory is not available. Everything's available for the right price. The vampire, barely 50 years old, Yevgeny guessed, smiled with all the confidence of someone who'd never truly lost. The Eastern Territory is wasted on you. Your old world, soft, you let humans run wild, let them set the terms. We could triple the profit from this area alone. Humans are not profit margins, they're people. See, that's exactly what we mean, soft. The vampire's eyes drifted to the bakery window, where Zinnia was visible working inside. Pretty little thing in there, though. I can see why you're distracted. Maybe when we take over, we'll keep her. Fresh blood on tap. Yevgeny had him by the throat before he finished the sentence, lifted off the ground and slammed against the brick wall hard enough to crack mortar. You will never touch her. You will never come to this street again, and you will take your challenge back to whatever hole you crawled from and tell them that I will end anyone who threatens what is mine. The other two vampires moved forward, but Yevgeny simply looked at them, letting them see exactly how old he was, how much power lived in his blood. They froze. We're not afraid of you, the leader choked out, even as his feet dangled in the air. You should be. Yevgeny dropped him, watching dispassionately as he crumpled to the ground. But you're young and stupid, so I'll explain once. This territory operates under the old laws. Humans are protected. Hunting is regulated. Those who live here live in peace. Challenge me if you want, but do it properly. Send formal notice. Set the terms. Face me yourself instead of sniffing around bakeries at dawn. The old laws are dead. I'm not. He let his eyes bleed to red, let his own fangs extend. Leave now. They left, but not before the leader spat blood on the cobblestones and said, "This isn't over." No, it probably wasn't. Yevgeny waited until they disappeared, then slipped into the bakery. Zinnia looked up from a tray of scones, her smile automatic and bright. You're early, and are you okay? You seem tense. I'm fine. Work complications. The territory management thing? Yes. She set down the scone and came around the counter, looking up at him with concern clear on her face. Yevgeny, if something's wrong, it's nothing I can't handle. I know you can handle it. You're clearly good at your job, but that doesn't mean you have to handle it alone. She reached out and took his hand, her warm fingers wrapping around his cold ones. You can talk to me. I'm your friend, remember? The feel of her hand in his, small and soft and trusting, made something in his chest crack open. When was the last time someone had offered him comfort instead of demanding his strength? When was the last time someone had looked at him and seen not the Vampire King, but simply Yevgeny? There are people who want to take over my territory, he said quietly. They don't follow the same rules I do. If they succeed, a lot of humans will suffer, including you. Then don't let them succeed. It's not that simple. They're challenging the old ways, saying I'm too soft, too lenient, and perhaps they're right. Perhaps I've been holding on to outdated principles while the world moves on without me. Zinnia squeezed his hand. Do you believe humans deserve protection? Yes. Do you believe might makes right? No. Then you're not outdated. You're decent, and decency never goes out of style. She smiled up at him. Though I'll admit, the fancy coat and dramatic hair are very vintage. Are you making fun of me? Only a little is how I show affection. Affection. The word hung between them, loaded with meanings he didn't dare examine. Her hand was still in his, and he became suddenly, intensely aware of her warmth, her softness, the way her brown eyes reflected the candlelight from the sconces she kept lit for ambience. Zinnia, he said, his voice rougher than intended. Yes? If things become dangerous, if these vampires escalate, you need to promise me you'll leave the city. Go somewhere safe until it's resolved. She frowned. Vampires? What are you talking about? He'd slipped. Exhaustion and worry had made him careless. A figure of speech. The people challenging my territory, they're ruthless, vampiric in their greed. Oh. She relaxed slightly. Well, that's a dramatic way to put it, but okay, and no. No? No, I'm not leaving. This is my bakery, my neighborhood. The people here need me, Mrs. Patterson, the shelter, all my regular customers. I'm not abandoning them because some greedy jerks are making trouble. You could die. So could you, but you're not running. I'm different. How? Because I'm already dead, he thought. Because I've lived long enough that my own death holds no terror. Because I've survived wars and plagues and countless enemies, and I'll survive this too. But you're fragile and mortal and infinitely precious. I'm trained for this, he said instead. You're not. Then train me, or protect me, or both. But I'm staying, Yevgeny. She lifted her chin, stubborn and determined. You don't get to make that choice for me. He wanted to argue, wanted to use his influence, his power, everything at his disposal to ensure her safety. But the set of her jaw, the fire in her eyes, told him she would fight him every step of the way. You're incredibly frustrating, he said. Thank you, I work hard at it. She tugged his hand, pulling him toward the counter. Now come on. I made something new, and I want your opinion. I can't eat. I know. Just smell it and tell me if it works. She led him into her warm, flower-dusted world, and he followed, helpless as a moth to flame. The challenge came formally 3 days later, a letter sealed with black wax delivered to his court by a human messenger who trembled so badly he could barely stand. Yevgeny read it once, expression carefully neutral, then dismissed everyone from his throne room to read it again in private. Yevgeny Emberlain, called King of the Eastern Territory, you are challenged for your crown and lands by the coalition of New Blood. Your adherence to outdated laws and soft treatment of human cattle has made you unfit to rule. We demand single combat. Winner takes all territories and titles to take place at the next new moon. Refuse, and we will take your territory by force, block by block, and your precious humans will burn with you. Signed, Konstantin Varga, Nikitas Corvus, and Damian Stelios, coalition leaders single combat, but 3 signatures. Yevgeny set the letter down carefully, his hand steady despite the cold rage flowing through him. They were maneuvering around the old laws, exploiting a loophole. If 3 challenged together as a unified force, they could argue that they represented a single entity. He would have to face them all, one after another, with no time to recover between bouts. It was clever, it was cowardly, and it was probably going to work. He could refuse and rally his own people, turn this into a full war. But wars were messy, and humans always suffered most when vampires fought. The coalition had chosen their target well. If Yevgeny wanted to protect his territory, protect Zinnia, he would have to accept. But 3 against 1, even with his age and power, the odds were not good. His phone rang. Zinnia's name lit up the screen, and he answered without thinking. Hello? Hi. Sorry to call. I know you're probably busy with work stuff, but I just finished a huge order and I'm feeling celebratory. Want to come by early tonight? I'll teach you how to make croissants. Fair warning, it takes forever, but they're so worth it. Her voice, warm and alive and utterly unaware of the danger circling her world, loosened something in his chest. I'll be there. Great. Oh, and Yevgeny? Thanks for whatever you did with the rent thing. I got a letter from Harker Holdings apologizing for the clerical error and reducing my rate even lower than before. You're basically my hero. Hero. Him. The Vampire King who had killed more people than he could count, who had built his power on blood and fear and centuries of ruthless calculation. But when Zinnia said it, with such uncomplicated gratitude in her voice, he almost believed it could be true. I'll see you soon, he said, and hung up before she could hear the emotion roughening his words. That night, Zinnia taught him croissants. She was right, it took forever, an endless process of rolling and folding and chilling the butter-laden dough. But that she chattered through the whole thing, telling him about her day, about the customer who'd ordered a wedding cake shaped like a dragon, about Mrs. Patterson's nephew visiting from Seattle. Her hands moved with practiced grace, and Yevgeny found himself mesmerized by the simple competence of her movements, the way she inhabited her body with such unselfconscious ease. You're staring, she said without looking up. I'm observing, learning. Very intense observing, but she smiled, pleased rather than uncomfortable. Okay, now we wait for the dough to chill again. 20 minutes. Want to sit? They settled at one of the small tables near the window, the city dark and quiet outside. Zinnia had lit candles throughout the bakery tonight, claiming the overhead lights were too harsh for delicate work. The flickering lights softened everything, turned the flour-dusted surfaces to gold, painted shadows across her round face. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said. "Yes." "Why are you really here? And don't say you like the bread. You've never eaten a single thing I've made." He could deflect, could lie. But after 3 weeks of her honest warmth, deception felt like a betrayal. "Because you make me remember what it's like to be human." She blinked. "But you are human." "I meant before my work consumed everything, before I became only what I had to be." He looked at his hands, pale against the warm wood of the table. "You're kind without expecting anything in return. You create instead of taking. You're everything I've forgotten how to be." "Yevgeny." Her hand covered his on the table. "You're kind too. You fix my rent. You help me bake. You show up every night just to keep me company. That's not the behavior of someone who forgot how to be good. I've done terrible things. For good reasons, perhaps, but terrible nonetheless. We've all done things we're not proud of. That doesn't define us. What we do now, that's what matters." He turned his hand over, lazing his fingers through hers. Her warmth soaked into his skin, and he thought about the challenge letter waiting in his court, about the odds of surviving 3-on-1 combat, about how many nights like this he might have left. "Zinnia, I need to tell you something." "Okay." "I'm not what you think I am." She waited, patient and open. "I'm not human. I'm a vampire. I have been for over 300 years. I rule the Eastern Territory, which includes this entire neighborhood, and I've been keeping you safe without you knowing it." The words tumbled out faster now, urgent. "There are other vampires who want my territory, and they've challenged me to combat. If I lose, they'll take over, and they don't share my beliefs about protecting humans. You'll be in danger. Everyone you care about will be in danger." Zinnia stared at him. The candles flickered. Outside, a car alarm went off and fell silent. "You're serious," she said finally. "Yes. You think you're a vampire. I know I am." She withdrew her hand slowly. "Yevgeny, that's... Okay, I think maybe you've been working too hard. Stress can cause..." He moved faster than human eyes could follow, crossing the bakery and returning to his seat in the space between heartbeats. Zinnia's breath caught. "I don't age," he continued quietly. "I don't eat. Sunlight burns me. I'm stronger and faster than any human, and I've watched empires rise and fall." He let his eyes shift to red, let his fangs extend. "I am a vampire, and I think I'm falling in love with you." The last part slipped out unintended, but once said, he couldn't take it back, wouldn't take it back. Let her know the truth, all of it, before the new moon came and he had to face 3 vampires with nothing but his fading strength and outdated principles. Zinnia stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. She backed toward the counter, her hand groping for something, a rolling pin, he realized, as if that would stop him if he meant her harm. "This isn't funny," she said, her voice shaking. I'm not joking. Vampires aren't real. We are. We've always been real. We just learned to hide better than your legends suggest. Get out." The words hit him like a physical blow. "Zinnia, get out of my bakery, now. I don't know if you're on drugs or having a breakdown or if this is some kind of sick joke, but I don't want any part of it. Leave." He stood slowly, hands raised in a gesture of peace. "I understand, but please. Listen, you need to leave the city before the new moon. That's 10 days from now. Go somewhere far away and stay there until I contact you. I've already arranged..." "I said get out!" She threw the rolling pin. It clattered harmlessly on the floor between them, but the message was clear. Yevgeny backed toward the door, memorizing every detail of her frightened face, the way her chest heaved with panicked breaths, the flour still dusting her apron from the croissants they'd made together. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "for frightening you, for burdening you with this, but it's all true, and I will keep you safe whether you believe me or not." He left before she could respond, stepping into the pre-dawn darkness and feeling the sun's approach like a countdown to execution. For 3 days, Yevgeny stayed away from the bakery. He monitored it from a distance, assigning his most trusted people to watch over Zinnia without her knowledge. She was safe, still baking, still feeding Mrs. Patterson and the shelter, still not leaving the city despite his warnings. He spent the time preparing for the challenge, training with his second in command, reviewing every fighting technique he'd mastered over 3 centuries. But his mind kept drifting to Zinnia's frightened face, to the way she'd told him to leave, to the warmth he'd lost by telling her the truth. Perhaps he should have kept lying. Let her think him eccentric, let her remain ignorant and safe in that ignorance. But he'd wanted her to know him, really know him, before the end. On the fourth night, his second in command brought news. The human baker is asking questions. She's been researching vampires, reading everything she can find. She called the number you gave her for emergencies. Yevgeny's head snapped up. What did she say? She asked if you were telling the truth, if you really were what you claimed. A pause. I told her yes. And? She asked to see you. I said I'd pass along the message. Hope, dangerous and painful, flared in his chest. When? She's waiting at the bakery now. He was out the door before his second could say another word. Zinnia was sitting at their usual table when he arrived, the bakery dark except for candles. She'd been crying. He could see the redness around her eyes, the exhaustion in the set of her shoulders. But she looked up when he entered, and there was no fear in her face now, just exhaustion and something that might have been sadness. Is it true? She asked without preamble. Yes. Show me, not the eyes or the teeth. I could rationalize those. Show me something I can't explain away. Yevgeny thought for a moment, then held out his hand. With his other hand, he pulled a knife from his belt and sliced his palm open. Blood welled, dark red and slower than human blood. Zinnia gasped, starting forward, but he held up the wounded hand and let her watch as the flesh knit itself back together in seconds, leaving unbroken skin. Oh my God, she whispered. I'm sorry for all of this, for pulling you into my world, for making you afraid. He cleaned the knife and put it away. I'll stay away from now on. You won't see me again. But please, Zinnia, leave the city before the new moon. I've arranged passage and housing for you. Everything you need, just go. Why? Her eyes were huge in the candlelight. If you're some powerful vampire king, why do you care about one random human baker? Because you're not random. Because you taught me to knead bread, and you laugh at your own jokes, and you feed people for no reason, except that they're hungry. Because when I'm with you, I remember what it was like to be good. He smiled sadly. Because I love you. Zinnia stood up, crossing the distance between them slowly. She stopped just in front of him, close enough that he could feel her warmth, smell the vanilla and cinnamon that always clung to her skin. Her hand came up, hesitating, then touched his face. His skin was cold beneath her palm, unnaturally so. You're really a vampire, she said, wonder in her voice. I am. And you really love me? More than I thought possible. Even though I'm just human? Even though I'm not beautiful or special or... He caught her hand, pressing it harder against his face. You're the most beautiful thing I've seen in 300 years. You're special in ways you can't imagine, and you're everything I didn't know I needed. Oh, she said softly. Then, I don't want you to stay away. His dead heart stuttered. What? I spent 3 days researching vampires, reading every legend, every piece of folklore, and I realized all your weird habits, they all fit. The hours you keep, the way you move, the cold skin. I thought I was going crazy, but it all makes sense now. She stepped closer, and I realized something else. I missed you. I spent 3 days without you showing up to help me bake, and I was miserable. You're my best friend, Yevgeny. I don't care if you're a vampire. I care that you're kind and honest, and you keep me company when I'm tired. The challenge. Tell me about it. All of it. No more secrets. So he did. He told her about the coalition, about the 3 vampires who wanted his territory, about the single combat challenge that would decide everything. He told her the odds weren't good, that even with his age and skill, facing 3 opponents in succession would likely kill him permanently. He told her that if he lost, she needed to run, needed to get as far from the Eastern Territory as possible. Zinnia listened to all of it, her face growing paler with each detail. When he finished, she sat down heavily. So in 6 days, you're going to fight 3 vampires at once, and you'll probably die. Yes, and if you lose, they'll take over and hurt everyone in the neighborhood. Yes, that's unacceptable. Despite everything, he almost smiled. I agree, but I don't see an alternative. Then we find one. She stood up, determination replacing shock on her face. You said they are exploiting a loophole in the old laws, right? Claiming to be a single unified entity so they can all fight you together? Yes. Are there other loopholes, other rules they have to follow? Vampire law is ancient and complex. So teach me. We have 6 days. Use them. Zinnia, this isn't your fight. You're my friend. She stopped, color rising in her round cheeks. You matter to me. A lot. So yes, it is my fight. Now sit down and start explaining vampire law, because we're going to find a way to keep you alive. Over the next 3 nights, Zinnia turned the bakery into a war room. She baked with one hand and took notes with the other while Yevgeny explained every nuance of vampire law he could remember. She asked questions that hadn't occurred to him, found angles he'd overlooked, approached the problem with the same creative determination she applied to perfecting a croissant recipe. What if you challenged their right to be considered a unified entity? She asked on the second night, frosting a cake while reading from a book on vampire history he'd brought her. I'd have to prove they don't actually share unified goals. Do they? In wanting my territory, yes. But their motivations differ. One wants power, one wants wealth, one simply enjoys violence. That's not unified, that's coincidentally aligned. She pointed her frosting knife at him. You could argue that. It would require a formal hearing before the old council, and they haven't convened in 50 years. Then make them convene. You're a king, aren't you? Use that. He stared at her, this human woman with flour in her hair, and wondered how he'd lived 300 years without finding her. You're brilliant. I'm practical. There's a difference. But she smiled, pleased. Keep going. What other rules govern challenges? They worked until dawn, and Yevgeny left each morning feeling something he hadn't felt in decades. Hope. On the third night, hope turned to something deeper. They were taking a break from research, Zinnia rolling out dough for tomorrow's bread while Yevgeny watched. The radio played soft jazz and candles flickered throughout the bakery, casting everything in warm gold. Zinnia hummed along with the music, swaying slightly as she worked, and the sight of her soft and real and alive made something in his chest ache. Dance with me, he said without planning to. She looked up, surprised. What? Dance with me, please. Yevgeny, I'm covered in flour, and we have work to do. I don't care. Dance with me. Maybe she heard the urgency in his voice, the awareness of how few nights they might have left. Or maybe she simply wanted to, had been wanting to for a while. Either way, she wiped her hands on her apron and stepped into his arms. She fit against him perfectly despite their height difference, her soft curves pressed against his angular lines, her warmth seeping into his perpetual cold. He led her in a slow circle around the bakery, flour puffing up from the floor like snow with each step. She laughed, and the sound echoed off the walls like bells. I don't know how to ballroom dance, she said. Neither do I. I'm making it up. You're 300 years old. How do you not know how to dance? I know how to fight. Dancing wasn't a priority. That's the saddest thing I've ever heard. But she followed his lead, letting him guide her in gentle circles, her head coming to rest against his chest. They swayed together in the candlelit bakery, flour dusting the air around them, the ovens ticking as they cooled from the night's work. Outside, dawn approached, but for this moment, time seemed suspended. Yevgeny, Zinnia said quietly. Yes? If you win, when you win, what happens after? I continue ruling my territory, maintaining the peace, protecting the humans under my care. Will you still come to the bakery? If you'll have me. She pulled back just enough to look up at him, her brown eyes serious. What if I want more than that? What if I want you to stay, not just visit? His breath caught unnecessarily. What are you saying? I'm saying I've never felt this way about anyone. I'm saying you're the best part of my nights. I'm saying... She took a breath. I'm saying I think I'm falling in love with you too. He stopped dancing, his hands tightening on her waist. Zinnia, I'm a vampire. I don't age. I can't give you a normal life, children, growing old together, any of the things you deserve. I don't want normal. I want you. She reached up, her flour-dusted hand cupping his face. I want exactly this, you showing up at my bakery, helping me bake, dancing with me in the flour and candlelight. I want to know you'll be there tomorrow and the next day and the day after that. I could outlive you by centuries. Then love me for the time we have. Isn't that better than not loving me at all? She was right. Of course she was right. What were centuries of loneliness compared to decades of love? What was safety compared to the risk of having everything? He kissed her. Gentle at first, almost hesitant, his cold lips against her warm ones. She made a soft sound and pressed closer, her arms winding around his neck, and the kiss deepened into something desperate and perfect. She tasted like sugar and hope, and he thought he could happily exist on nothing but this for the rest of his immortal life. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Zinnia was smiling. So is that a yes? That's a yes to everything, to staying, to loving you, to whatever future we can build together. He rested his forehead against hers. But first I have to survive the challenge. You will. We'll make sure of it. They stood there in the candlelit bakery, holding each other while the ovens went cold and dawn painted the sky outside pale pink. And Yevgeny, who had lived through wars and centuries and countless deaths, felt more alive than he had in 300 years. The next 3 days passed in a blur of research preparation and stolen moments of intimacy. Zinnia contacted the old council on Yevgeny's behalf, leveraging his status and the letter of the law to demand a formal hearing before the challenge. The council, surprised to be summoned after decades of dormancy, agreed to convene the night before the new moon. "They're curious," Yevgeny's second-in-command reported. "They haven't heard from you in years, and suddenly you're invoking ancient protocols. The coalition is furious." "Good," Zinnia said, looking up from the legal text she had been studying. "Angry people make mistakes." The hearing took place in the old church above Yevgeny's court, the space transformed by candlelight and the presence of 5 ancient vampires who formed the council. They sat in a semicircle, white-haired and pale-skinned, their eyes holding centuries of judgment. The coalition stood on one side, Yevgeny on the other, with Zinnia behind him in a chair despite protests that humans shouldn't be present. This hearing will determine the validity of the challenge issued by the Coalition of New Blood. The eldest council member intoned, "Yevgeny Emberlain, you claim the challenge violates the principle of single combat. Explain." Yevgeny stepped forward, his voice clear and unwavering. "The old laws state that territorial challenges must be one-on-one combat, champion against champion. The coalition claims to be a unified entity, but I contest this. They are 3 separate vampires with 3 separate motivations, using a legal fiction to gain unfair advantage." "We are unified in purpose," Konstantin Varga snapped. "That's all that matters." "Purpose is not the same as entity," Zinnia said clearly, standing up. Every vampire in the room turned to stare at her, and Yevgeny felt his protective instincts surge. But she met their gazes steadily. "I've spent the last 3 days reading your laws. To be considered a unified entity, they would need to share blood, share territory, and share consequences equally. They've done none of that. They're simply 3 individuals who want the same thing. The human speaks out of turn," Damian Stelios said with a sneer. "The human is correct," the eldest council member said. "The girl has a point. What say you, coalition? Have you shared blood to bind yourselves? Do you currently rule unified territory? Would each of you share equally in consequences if one of you violated the laws?" Silence. The 3 coalition members exchanged glances, and Yevgeny could see the cracks in their alliance. They hadn't actually formalized anything. They had simply assumed the loophole would hold. "That's what I thought," Zinnia said. "So the challenge should proceed as 3 separate challenges, one-on-one, with proper time between bouts for recovery. Those are the old laws. Follow them, or admit you're too scared to face him fairly." Niketas Corvus snarled, his fangs extending. "How dare!" "Enough." The council elder raised his hand. "The human speaks true. The challenge is invalid as issued. However, the coalition has formally contested Yevgeny's rule, and that cannot be ignored. New terms, 3 separate single combats, 1 per night over 3 nights in the order the coalition chooses. This satisfies both honor and law. 3 fights instead of 1. 3 chances instead of a single impossible battle." Yevgeny felt relief wash through him, followed immediately by gratitude. He turned to look at Zinnia, who was still standing tall despite being surrounded by vampires, and mouthed, "Thank you." She smiled, and even in a room full of immortal predators, she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. The coalition left the hearing furious but bound by the council's ruling. 3 nights, 3 fights, beginning tomorrow with whichever champion they chose. Yevgeny had been given a fighting chance. "You were magnificent," he told Zinnia once they were alone in the church, the council having departed. "I was terrified, but I wasn't going to let them cheat." She took his hand. "You can win this. I know you can. Even if I can, there's risk. If something happens to me, nothing is going to happen to you. But if it does, my second in command has instructions to get you out of the territory. He'll make sure you're safe, that you have everything you need." Zinnia put her finger over his lips, silencing him. "Stop planning for failure. Plan for what we'll do when you win. Deal?" He smiled against her finger. "Deal. Good. Now take me back to the bakery. I need to bake you a victory cake, and you're going to help whether you can eat it or not." They spent his last night before the challenges in the bakery, making the most elaborate cake Zinnia had ever attempted, 4 tiers, each one a different flavor, the whole thing covered in buttercream roses. Yevgeny shaped the roses under her instruction, his ancient hands learning this new gentle art, and tried not to think about how this might be their last night together. "You're thinking depressing thoughts," Zinnia said. "Stop it. How did you know? You get this look. All broody and tragic. Very vampire of you." She bumped his hip with hers. "But we're not doing tragic tonight. Tonight is for cake and dancing and being happy. In that order, in whatever order we want." So they danced first, swaying between the ovens and the cooling racks, flour stirring up around their feet. Then they finished the cake, standing back to admire their work as dawn approached. And finally, as the sky outside began to lighten, Zinnia took his face in both hands and kissed him with such fierce tenderness that he felt it in his bones. "Come back to me," she whispered against his lips. "Always," he promised. The first fight took place in a warehouse on the edge of Yevgeny's territory, witnessed by both courts and the council. Konstantin Varga stepped forward as the coalition's first champion, the power-hungry one, all brute strength and aggression. It was a hard fight. Varga was young but vicious, and he had clearly been training for this. But Yevgeny had 300 years of experience, and more importantly, he had something to live for. Every time Varga knocked him down, he thought of Zinnia's smile, her warmth, her fierce determination in the council hearing, and he got back up. The fight ended with Varga yielding, his body too broken to continue. First victory. The second night, Nikita's Corvus stepped up the greedy one, fast and cunning. This fight was different, more strategy than strength, a chess game played at supernatural speed. Corvus fought dirty, going for disabling strikes, trying to injure Yevgeny badly enough that the third fight would be impossible. Yevgeny fought smarter. He thought of Zinnia teaching him to knead bread, patient and methodical, and applied that same patience to wearing Corvus down. The fight lasted hours, but eventually Corvus collapsed from exhaustion. Second victory. The third night, Damian Stelios waited the violent one, the one who fought for the sheer joy of causing pain. This was the fight Yevgeny had been dreading. Stelios was sadistic and creative, and he clearly intended to make this last. The fight started badly. Yevgeny was already injured from the previous 2 nights, and Stelios exploited every weakness with gleeful precision. Blood painted the warehouse floor, and Yevgeny felt his strength flagging. "I'm going to kill you slowly," Stelios whispered during a grapple, "and then I'm going to find that plump little baker of yours and make her scream." Rage, pure and cold and absolute, flooded through Yevgeny. No one threatened Zinnia. No one. He stopped fighting defensively and went on the offensive, channeling 300 years of violence into protecting the one thing that mattered. Stelios' smile faltered, then vanished entirely as he realized he'd made a fatal mistake. You didn't threaten what a vampire loved not if you wanted to survive. The fight ended with Stelios' neck in Yevgeny's grip, one twist away from final death. "Yield," Yevgeny commanded, his voice echoing through the warehouse. "Never!" Stelios spat, "Then suffer the consequences of your choices." He twisted, not quite hard enough to kill, but hard enough to break something that would take months to heal. Stelios screamed and collapsed, and the council elder called the fight. Victory to Yevgeny Emberlain, by right of 3 successful defenses. The Eastern Territory remains his, and the Coalition's challenge is ended. Yevgeny barely heard the words. He was already moving, pushing through the crowd, seeking the one face he needed to see. Zinnia stood near the entrance, flanked by his guards for protection, and her face was streaked with tears. He reached her, pulled her into his arms despite the blood covering him, and held on like she was the only thing keeping him anchored to the world, which perhaps she was. "You won," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "You won, you absolute idiot. You scared me to death. You won. Oh, I won." He confirmed and kissed her there in front of his entire court, human and vampire alike. Let them see. Let them know that the Vampire King had chosen his queen, and she was a plump baker with flower in her hair and more courage than armies. The celebration lasted a week. Zinnia insisted on catering a community feast for the whole neighborhood, determined that everyone who hadn't been at risk should share in the victory. She baked for days, and Yevgeny helped her every night, the bakery becoming a whirlwind of activity and joy. Mrs. Patterson from across the street came and cried when she saw all the food. The homeless shelter sent representatives who couldn't believe it was all free. Neighbors Yevgeny had protected without their knowledge for decades came and ate and laughed and thanked Zinnia for her generosity. You should tell them, Zinnia said as they watched the feast from the bakery doorway. Tell them what you did, that you're the reason they're safe. They don't need to know about vampires. Let them think it was just human politics. You're impossible, taking all this risk and wanting none of the credit. I have all the credit I need. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, tucking his chin over her head. I have you. She leaned back against him, soft and warm and perfect. Yeah, you do. Stuck with me forever now. Promise? Promise. The feast continued until dawn, and for the first time in his long existence, Yevgeny didn't retreat when the sun rose. Zinnia had hung heavy curtains in the back room of the bakery, creating a space where he could rest safely, and they curled up together on a makeshift bed as golden light filled the world outside. Tell me what happens now, she said sleepily, her head on his chest. Now I continue ruling my territory, making sure the laws are followed, that humans and vampires coexist peacefully. The usual. And us? We continue exactly as we are. You bake, I help, we dance in flower and candlelight, we build a life together, however that looks. I want to learn more about your world, about vampire politics and the old laws and all of it. Are you sure? It's dangerous. So is loving you. I'm doing it anyway. He tightened his arms around her. Then I'll teach you everything, make you an expert in vampire law. My courts will have to accept you as my consort. Consort, that's very fancy. You deserve fancy. I deserve you. That's fancier than any title. They lay together as the bakery quieted, the neighborhood settling into peaceful morning routines. Yevgeny listened to Zinnia's heartbeat slow as she drifted to sleep, steady and strong and alive. He'd spent 300 years existing without truly living, maintaining order without finding purpose. But now, with this extraordinary woman in his arms and her bakery as his sanctuary, he finally understood what he'd been missing. Not power or territory or even peace, though those mattered. What he'd been missing was connection, love, someone to dance with amid flower and candlelight, someone to make the endless years feel like an adventure rather than a sentence. I love you, he whispered into her hair. She made a sleepy sound, burrowing closer. Love you too. Now sleep. We have croissants to make tonight. Yes, madam. Outside, the city woke to a new day, unaware that its vampire king slept in a bakery, holding a human woman who taught him that strength came in many forms, that protecting your people sometimes meant learning to knead bread, that the bravest warriors were sometimes plump bakers who faced down ancient vampires with nothing but logic and love. The ovens had gone cold at dawn, but warmth filled every corner of the small bakery. And in the darkness behind heavy curtains, surrounded by the scent of vanilla and cinnamon and yeast, Yevgeny Emberlain finally came home. 3 months later, Zinnia officially became his consort in a ceremony that blended vampire tradition with human sensibility. She insisted on having it in the bakery, of course, with a cake she'd made herself and decorations that included strings of lights shaped like tiny bread loaves. The vampire court didn't know quite what to make of it, but they accepted her with the same respect they showed Yevgeny, partly because of his authority, mostly because she'd proven herself clever and brave enough to deserve the position. I still can't believe this is my life, Zinnia said 6 months in, frosting a wedding cake for a human couple while Yevgeny handled paperwork for his territory at one of her tables. Dating a vampire king, learning about blood rights and territorial law, having guards follow me everywhere. You can tell them to leave if they bother you. Are you kidding? They help me carry flour bags. I'm keeping them. He looked up from his papers, love swelling in his chest at the sight of her hair in its messy bun, apron dusted with sugar, completely at ease in her dual role as baker and vampire consort. You're remarkable. I'm really not. I just bake bread and love you. Pretty simple formula. Simple, he repeated, amused. Nothing about loving her was simple. It was complicated and wonderful, and sometimes terrifying, especially when she insisted on attending vampire political functions and charming ancient immortals with her stories about sourdough starters. But it was his life now, and he wouldn't trade it for anything. A year after the challenge, Zinnia expanded the bakery, adding a small cafe section where humans and vampires could meet on neutral ground. It became unexpectedly popular, a place where both communities mingled freely under Yevgeny's protection and Zinnia's welcoming smile. She hired staff, mostly humans, but a few vampires who were interested in learning about food even if they couldn't eat it. "You're changing my territory," Yevgeny observed, watching vampire and human customers chat over coffee and pastries. "For better or worse?" "For better. Definitely for better." 2 years in, they settled into a rhythm that felt like forever, or at least as close to forever as a human lifespan allowed. Every night, Yevgeny would finish his territorial duties and arrive at the bakery sometime between 3 and 4 a.m. Zinnia would set him to work, helping with whatever needed doing. They would talk and laugh and steal kisses between batches of bread, and always, at some point before dawn, they would dance. Sometimes it was to radio music, sometimes to nothing but the sound of the ovens ticking as they cooled. Sometimes in flour, sometimes in sugar, sometimes in cocoa powder that left dark streaks across her skin that he'd kiss away. But always they danced, holding each other in the warm golden space she'd created, the world outside fading to nothing. "What are you thinking?" Zinnia asked during one such dance 3 years into their relationship. "That I'm grateful." "For what?" "For everything. For you being stubborn enough to research vampires instead of running. For you standing up to the council. For you teaching me that protecting people could mean something more than just keeping them alive." He spun her slowly. "For you loving me despite every reason you shouldn't." "There's no reason I shouldn't love you. You're kind and honorable and you make me laugh. Plus, you're really good at shaping croissants now." "High praise indeed." "I'm serious though." She stopped dancing, looking up at him with those warm brown eyes. "You're the best thing that's ever happened to me. I know we can't have forever the way normal couples do, but I'll take whatever time we get, every night, every dance, every moment. I'll take it all and be grateful." "Zinnia Lightwell," he said solemnly, "you are the love of my immortal life. Whatever time we have, I'm yours completely." "Good. Now kiss me before the cinnamon rolls burn." He kissed her there in the candlelit bakery, flour dusting the air around them, the ovens radiating their last warmth before dawn. And in that moment, surrounded by the evidence of her creation and generosity and love, Yevgeny felt something he hadn't felt in 300 years. Complete. The years would pass. Zinnia would age while he stayed frozen. Eventually, they would have to face the reality of human mortality, but not tonight. Tonight was for dancing, for baking, for holding each other in the warmth she'd created in this small corner of his vast territory. Tonight, the Vampire King was simply Yevgeny, and his baker was simply Zinnia, and the love between them was simply everything. Outside, the city slept. The ovens went cold. Dawn painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, and in the bakery, they danced on,